Hi everyone, thank you so much for clicking to watch this video. If you're new here, my name is Sandy and on this channel we talk about pursuing a career in interior design and I give you home decor tips. Today's video is on the career side of things because it is another interview with my old professor, Michael Kleeman. Hi Professor, how are you?
Hi everyone, I'm well, how are you?
I'm great. Fun fact, this is the second time we are recording this. The first time my computer completely crashed and I lost the entire file. So thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me again. Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. So when I was in school, Kleeman was my professor, and the class that I took with him were my favorite classes. I'm not just saying that because we're on camera and because you're here. History of Furniture 1 and 2, I believe, were the classes I took with you, and those were definitely my favorite. I just loved learning how things came to be and how things I thought were modern were actually really old, and how the styles recycled themselves every like 20 years or so. Oh, that was really
old, relatively speaking.
Oh yes, old relatively. In addition to being my professor, at the time that I was attending the Art Institute, you were also the director of the interior design program there.
Right. Okay.
So I feel like you are super equipped to answer some of these questions about applying to design school and kind of what people can expect when going into school, or what you notice that students are potentially disillusioned about.
Okay.
Sometimes. Yeah. So the first question I have for you is actually, do you need a portfolio to apply to design school?
The answer is that there's not a universal answer. Depending on where you want to go, some places require a portfolio, some places don't require a portfolio, some places sort of want to see where you are in that first year. There are several schools that will allow you into a first-year program, and then at the end of that first-year program, they will have sort of evaluated the skills that they are looking for in sort of progressing through the program. There are some schools that will look at your portfolio and evaluate merit from that for advancement, but they will also look at that in terms of scholarship monies. So there's balances that sort of go in and out of that. And you know, the best answer is put yourself out there with what you have and what you have done, and be honest about it and see where it takes you.
Yes, thank you. That is such a good answer. I get that question a lot. And for people who, because you're saying be honest about where you are and what you've done and where your work is right now, what can people include in their portfolios if they've never like taken a drawing class or any kind of CAD class, or if you're coming, especially if you're coming from like a different career or from high school where you don't really have like anything, how do you propose that someone handles that when they're having to apply to a school that requires a portfolio?
Would imagine that you do something that is on the creative side, and that something is what is your sort of entree into the design careers. And so I would show that. So if you are very invested in photography, great photographs can show how good you are at looking at things. I mean, a lot of times we think about drawing as representing, and eventually it becomes about information, but a lot of times our initial drawing is about looking. And so we do that same thing with the camera lens. It may be a mood board that you created, or a group of things, you know, clustering of things where they would look to see colors or furnishings or lighting, things that you would put together. It could be sketches or drawings or paintings or watercolors that you've done. Anything sort of in the creative field lets us into your brain just a little bit.
Oh, that's a lovely answer. I didn't realize that photographs were something that you could submit, but you're right, that is artistic, and you are choosing how to look at something. And it's good to know that mood boards are acceptable too, because sometimes I worry that I haven't advised those to anybody because I worried that perhaps they were too juvenile or too elementary. I didn't know, because we still use them, even professionals use them, but I didn't know what it would look like coming from a student.
But I feel like you have to be self-critical. So if you're really excited and you submit 27 mood boards, probably not a good look. But if you take 2 really exceptional ones and put those with some other creative pieces, it shows that you are both creative, that you have a talented eye, that you have a drive towards this, and here's just a little bit of the sort of in-field knowledge.
If you can't draw, can you still be a good designer? Because people ask me that up and down all day, 24/7.
It's interesting that you say that. I was on a diversity talk for ASID earlier this week, and that was one of the topics that we hit on was, how do more diversified groups of people look at architecture, interior design, the creative fields like that. And I said, I want everybody to stop sending all their art students into design and all their math students into engineering and all their interior design, architecture, all the creative fields like that involve everything they involve. So there were other people there from Florida State, from Auburn, who were also talking on this. And one of them, really pushed writing. One of them really pushed drawing. One of them really one of us really pushed math. And so it's the idea of all these things sort of coming together. It's not that there is one of those that's the be all end all that's going to make you the best designer, but how you sort of broach all those into sort of one thing, because measurements are important and understanding scale is important, and looking and noticing details, whether that's through sketching or through on-site photographs or other things like that, they are important, and the eye-hand coordination is there. So maybe your tennis game is important to you as well, but all these things sort of come together. Your ability to describe and to use really descriptive words instead of cool and neat and fun and super, really giving some weight visually so that somebody could imagine what something looks like from the descriptors in your words.
More imagery, provoking adjectives. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. So the answer I gathered is no, you don't have to be able to draw to be a good designer.
Oh, you wanted a simple answer.
Yeah.
Never mind. Drawing is not the be all end all. Drawing is a function of it. So, come with what you have again and amplify what you've got and plan to make where you are better with your drawings.
That's good. I always had, who is it? It was Professor Smith. She was showing us some of her work from 3ds Max, and she was like, look, I can draw stick figures, you guys. I could never be your drawing teacher. I can only be your Revit teacher because she's like, I don't know how to draw. But she was very reliant on technology as a result, but she was really, really good at the renderings and all the other things. So I guess that's just, embrace it. There's like a lane for everyone. Embrace the thing that you're good at.
But because I have known, some people for quite a while, when she was a student, she still took a hand rendering class and
you have to, right?
class, and she made it all the way through those, and I'm sure she probably excelled at those because she put in the work. And so she could definitely say that she was better at any of those things than when she started.
True. Yes, I am definitely better at drawing than when I started. I started drawing just like fruit in the observational drawing class and random shapes, and then took the perspective class and was actually impressed at some of the things I came up with. Even the furniture I drew for your class, I was like, whoa, at the end of it, this looks pretty cool. What science is involved in being a designer? Science and math. You mentioned that design is not just art separate of all these other disciplines. So how involved do you feel that science and math are as part of the design world?
Science is sort of applied sciences. It's if you can understand the theory, the loose theories behind a lot of things, then you can get the basics of what you need to know framed out, and then experts can be brought in, meaning you need to sort of understand that gravity exists. But there's going to be a structural engineer that's often going to work with you on bigger picture, very specific sizing of beams or things like that. You need to understand that, like physics and optics exist, and that light travels in waves and these things. But there's possibly a lighting designer on larger commercial projects. You will take technical classes in lighting, and you will sort of understand those types of things, or you'll understand the math that'll be involved with building codes, because they're tied to progressively logical elements, and you are applying them in a very specific way. So do you have to be Isaac Newton or Einstein with your science? No, but if you understand their basic principles, the knowledge of the principles will sort of guide you to making smart choices about the placement of lights, how much, what your cone of vision is, how you can see these things. And so I wouldn't run into the room screaming, I don't like math, I don't like science. But what you do is you really apply these things in a practical way towards the profession that you love. So,
can I get an example of a practical application?
practical application, like when we look at spacing fire sprinkler heads, wanting to get overhead, and so sort of how far they project, and so you can take where they are and sort of inscribe a circle around that, and then take where the next one is and inscribe the circle around that, and see if they overlap so that you get coverage. Same thing with lights or other things like that.
Yeah. So that's a super great example. And I really like how you mentioned you would bring in like a structural engineer or a lighting designer, because I think a big part of the confusion with the way design is reported to the mainstream world, like your shows that are on major networks and things like that, is that I think sometimes the general public thinks the designers do everything themselves. And that we're all just painting, and we're all, I don't know, doing our own molding. And, yeah, that we're hanging the wallpaper. And it's no, you hire people for that. The designer is really more the what's that person when you're at an orchestra and they're like doing this and
the conductor?
Yes.
The visionary.
Yes. I feel like the designer is more the conductor, and then you have to have like somebody playing the violin and somebody on a flute and somebody, I don't know, on a triangle or whatever. I've never been to the opera.
Exactly. So if you look at, those lists of skills that you keep sort of adding on, and this and this and this, project management, somebody's ability to sort of see the big picture and bring in the right people to support that. And the larger the project, the more of those people you have. The smaller the project, the more the interior designer and architect are doing it themselves.
Yeah.
Not necessarily physically building themselves, but directing everyone.
More, yeah. Because I feel like when designers mostly start out, they're kind of the project manager. And then when you're at a bigger firm or you have more resources, then you actually hire a separate project manager because you still have all the visionary stuff to do.
Exactly. And multiple projects to juggle.
Oh, yes. And hopefully the prosperity, tons of projects to juggle, hopefully. And on to our next question. Oh, actually, this isn't one I have listed, but you mentioned the designer and the architect. So how do designers and architects work in unison? And are any of their jobs are any of their responsibilities like interchangeable? Like the designer could do it or the architect could do it, or is there like a clear line of really only the architect does this and only the designer does this? How do they work together?
It again works on sort of economies of scale. In theory, the architect is working on the building shell. They're making sure the building is protected from everything on the outside world. The architect is taking it sort of from that building shell and moving inside. As both professions have been licensed, interior designers can do small pieces that are there. Like for instance, if they're changing the way, you're going from a kitchen and you want to put a French door onto the outside and then connect to a patio. There are small elements that can be done like that. If they start to grow larger, the interior designer would need to coordinate with a structural engineer. If it takes on sort of a redesign of the exterior facade, a lot of times they will bring on an architect. And likewise, an architect takes on a large role with the building and the complexity of the building. A lot of times he'll bring in an interior designer because there's a whole scope and an expertise that's there with material knowledge and things like that that he or she is not as aware of. And that's sort of when you go on with those things. And either of them, depending on who leads into the project, could be the driver of the other one, depending on who brought whom in.
Okay. What I'm hearing from because I understand what you're saying, but I don't know that everyone else can understand. I'm also very used to how you string things together.
What was the first question? That was the part that I don't think that I answered. You had a very initial question.
What are the differences in duties between the architect and the designer, which you did answer.
Okay.
And then are there any tasks that they perform that are like interchangeable, like a designer could do it or an architect could do it, which I also think you actually kind of answered. Well, for me, it was answered. But I think kind of what you've what you've explained, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that an architect, and this is very general, very oversimplified, an architect deals with the outside, the shell, the structure, the safety of those kinds of things. And then the designer, everything that someone actually touches and interacts with on a personal level would be more of the interior designer's responsibility.
That, and then they would both sort of share a responsibility for life safety. So getting people out of the building in an emergency scenario, they're both planning. Exactly. They are both planning for those scenarios and making clear pathways, counting number of exits, counting their widths, the ways in which they may egress, may exit from the building. Exactly.
Would you say there's a clear difference between an interior architect and interior designer?
That's definitely a blurry boundary. In general terms, the interior architects tend to want to shape the space, and they tend to want to really focus on that and building out that interior shell, that interior envelope. They do focus on some finishes that are permanent in that. They tend to focus less on the furnishings. The interior designer tends to focus on the furnishings, the fixtures, the equipment, the finishes, the life safety issues we were just talking about, as well as shaping the interior space. I think they could both do that. Interior designers lead to licensure. Interior architect, they probably have a lot of the same pieces to that. But they tend to be people who are more focused towards the most architectural of parts. Okay. And it's a broad generalization. I can't say that everyone is for this, but the majority of ones that I've spoken to don't tend to focus on furnishings. Doesn't tend to be where their interests are.
That's what I thought you would. You've given the answer that I've kind of divulged for myself. No, it wasn't long. I was just saying, like, based off of what I have looked into, because I didn't hear about that term probably until I started looking for interior design schools back in like 2017. And I was like, interior architecture, what's that? But I've never heard anyone introduce themselves as an interior architect, which right. Or I guess they'd probably introduce themselves at whatever their position is at wherever they work at. Because that person could also, it seems that person is responsible more for, or identifies a little bit more with structural inside as opposed to structural outside, like an architect.
Exactly.
Okay. So you are a professor at an accredited school right now.
I am.
And as far as accreditation goes, do you believe that it's better to go to an accredited school versus not an accredited school?
I do. If you look at any sort of person that holds themselves up to a measure, an accredited school, basically what they're saying is that they are willing to put their curriculum and the way in which they interact with students up against the lens of somebody else and sort of have their broad measurement. So we can always do sort of things that are important or things that we feel are important for the students to learn throughout, but we're also holding that up against someone else's lens, someone else's yardstick to that, and having them look at it from an outside perspective. And they have no affiliation to the schools. They come in, they do a deep dive into sort of everything that you're teaching and look that all of these criteria are being met. And in doing so, it sort of validates what you're doing. It reinforces it. It gives notes. It's the same as a critique in a studio. If there are notes to us, then they share those notes as well and in their written report. And those are things that you can really look at. And then about halfway towards your next accreditation, they'll ask you to write how you've taken the intermediate time to address some of those things. And you can say, we didn't think it was a good note. We really didn't. Or you can say, actually, it was good to hear that because we had questions about it. And, we sort of addressed it in these classes by beginning to look at this or interacting with students differently this way, or asking students to come up with multiple options and, sort of weigh it themselves, whatever the note is.
So the note comes from from the council, right? So is there ever any pushback, like school-wise? Like if the council impresses like a new rule that the school maybe thinks isn't necessary, doesn't agree with, is there ever any pushback in that direction, or is it only like one-sided?
There's a lag time, and so if the Council for Interior Design Accreditation is going to propose a new set of things, then they publish those and they sort of post them, and they'll leave them up for a lengthy period of time, and they'll have public comment. And so that's the time for people who are interested in that to really review those, see what major changes, like probably 5 years ago, there were some major changes, and it took a longer portion in the review process because they had more notes coming from people about, would this be an asset? Would it be a limitation? Would it sort of change the parameters of some of the evaluative points?
May I ask what the change was?
It didn't affect anything that we were doing.
Okay.
And so we weren't actually one of the people, but it wasn't, to us, it was not major. Okay. So it didn't really stick with me. But there were several programs that were sort of hot and heavy about it and wanted to discuss it. And so they actually delayed it a year before its implementation because they got so many notes from the public. And then a revision of that was introduced and reviewed and implemented. And then there's never a time where you sort of get the new things and you're sort of immediately in that year. It's always going to be, you get the new things, you've sort of got the time to review, it's implemented, and then your visit is.
Ah, okay. All right, so I thought it was like boom, bam, like now we're all doing the new stuff. Okay. That's good to know. You attended an accredited university yourself, is that correct?
In architecture, not interior design.
Yeah, yes, because your bachelor's is in architecture and then your master's, I think, is in interior design?
My master's is in architecture as well, and architectural history.
Architectural history. Oh, okay. Sorry. I misread your LinkedIn. So okay. When you attended an accredited school and then you sat for the NCIDQ exam, right?
Yes.
Do you think it's important for designers to take the exam?
I think if that is your personal goal, then it's very important because you need to sort of fulfill your goals. To be a licensed interior designer, you have to have passed the NCIDQ exam. Mm-hmm. And that means that you can file for licensure in your state. It means that you can stamp drawings. It means that you take on the liability and the responsibility of doing that. But it also means that you don't have to then pay someone else to stamp drawings for you after reviewing your work. If there is someone who is enamored with interior design, but plans their sort of professional path, they feel is going into a large firm, a 200, 300 plus firm, they will never be required to use their own stamp to stamp drawings. It will always be the stamp of the firm. And so it's less important for their station within the firm. If they want to go out and be an entrepreneur and work on their own, it's very important. If their sort of professional track is geared towards that.
Okay. So less important at a firm, more important if you're going to be starting your own business.
It is, but I'll make it all very muddy here. It is also the larger firms that tend to pay for you to take the exam, that oftentimes give you bonuses to your paycheck at the point at which you take the exam. Mm-hmm. And so they want to have sort of the most staunch professionals there, and they tend to offer a few more of the perks than smaller places do. Mm-hmm. So that's why you see a lot of people who do have that sort of entrepreneur path cutting their teeth in a larger firm, getting the perks from that, getting the experience on big projects, and then sort of feeling confident enough to move out on their own. So, really outline for yourself what you want to accomplish and make sure that that is a part of it if you feel like you are going to be responsible at some point.
So if you said some really good nuggets there, and I want to point out, think about 3 of them. My first point is, if I'm going to go into, let's say, being a set designer or a stylist for photo shoots, or just someone who deals with soft furnishings, would it be as necessary to go and get my certification or my license for certain things like that? And then you mentioned stamp drawings. I know what you mean, but would you mind telling everyone at home what it means to stamp drawings and what drawings you were talking about?
Okay. In any city, there is a Bureau of Buildings, and that Bureau of Buildings is responsible for building permits. It may be demo permits, it may be building permits, it may be renovation permits, but they are going to require licensed drawings so that they can make sure that things are built according to industry standards, that can make sure that they're constructed well. So they're going to have to go in and be reviewed by that company. Or by that county. Somebody's going to have to do that. And like I said, with certain size drawings, it's going to need to be an architect. Sometimes it's going to be an interior designer. It just depends on the scope of work.
Mm-hmm. And then so they get those drawn. Once those are finalized, then you stamp them saying that this is appropriate to be built and this is safe for people to come in and out of and live in and work in.
Right. I stamp it saying I'm putting my professional license on the line because I'm willing to put these sort of in front of the county for review, and then also hold that up against sort of construction in case anything goes wrong later on.
So if something does go wrong, what does that look like for the architect or the designer who did stamp them?
It looks like a call to their insurance agent because they are going to be relying on that liability insurance.
Yeah.
We have some responsibilities, and that's part of the reason why we take it seriously on particularly the life safety, on the material knowledge, everything about slip resistance, coefficients of friction. There's your science playing into it again. Looking at how these things might work because you're choosing materials, knowing sort of what the expectation of where it's being installed at. So if I'm coming out of a shower or a sauna, someplace that has a lot of liquid, I don't have a high coefficient friction on the tile that's selected there. There's a point of liability, and I'm going to need to look at what that design is and if that's an appropriate installation point for that.
Someone can sue for it. I know that people sue for like slipping and falling and things like that all the time. I never really thought about that falling back on, like if I sue Publix and I slip and fall, whoever the designer is for Publix who like puts the stores together and does those things, that person could then be domino effect into.
You notice that every time you go into Publix after a rain, they have those yellow cones out and those mats out very quickly, right?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, so there you go.
They're like, don't sue us. You could fall. We know you could fall.
We did what we could.
Oh my God, I never thought about it like that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense now. All right, moving on to our next question. Okay, that was actually the next one I had, and one of my last ones. When I was in school, you were very vocal about us joining organizations and encouraging us to do so and become student members of ASID or IIDA or NEWH, whatever organizations there were. What do you think is the importance of becoming part of a design organization?
It's networking. To the point that you just made about somebody who wanted to go into set design or something like that, not necessarily needing their NCIDQ, they are going to rely on their skills, but they are going to rely on networking. And so they need to look at the bodies that are around set design and those types of things and get involved with that. People on our professional sort of track also need to look at joining ASID, the American Society of Interior Designers, or IIDA, the International Interior Design Association. NEWH is more related to hospitality work. There is
NKBA, I believe.
NKBA, National Kitchen and Bath. There's another one that's related to healthcare. There is
what's the environmental one?
That are related to, say that again.
The environmental one. There's like a lead.
There's two. There's lead and well at this point. Okay. You can become certified by both. Those are certifications more so than professional organizations, but there are green professional organizations as well. And so that networking gets you near people who are interested in sort of the same aspects of the field as you. It's a social outlet. And so for a lot of younger people, it's a great way to meet others. From a moving from job to job standpoint, I sort of got my first job, and then almost all of my jobs after that were through people that I knew, other designers, representatives that are always going in and out of firms with whatever product they're representing. So you may meet someone at this, you get to know them through the professional organization. You work for two totally different firms, but one day you decide that you sort of want to move on and take on different responsibilities. And this person that you knew over here, who has always raved about her job, says, we are looking for a new person for da 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 da. And suddenly you've got not only knowledge about where to send your resume, but somebody to actually hand deliver your resume into their, into the person who would make the decisions, alongside a recommendation, on your behalf. And so it works really well for you. And that's sort of the self-serving side of it. ASID and IIDA help with training so that you can keep up your continuing education credits. You're required to do so many each year to maintain your membership. So they offer programs for that. And then, like I said, the social aspects as well. And then when you're working with individual clients, they love to see sort of those appellations behind your name.
The alphabet soup.
Exactly. NCIDQ, ASID.
They don't know what it means. They're just like, ooh, fancy.
It's just like impressive. The whole alphabet is behind you.
On your name. For organizations, I definitely that hit close to my heart because I feel bad sometimes for students who, how do I say this without sounding like you shouldn't do your work? You should do your work. Okay, everyone, you should, if you're in school and you're a design student, you should definitely be doing your schoolwork. But sometimes I think that schoolwork gets prioritized above networking. And I would almost say that networking is slightly more important than your school, just a step above, because if you're, you can get A's on all your projects, but if you graduate and you have a 4.0 and you've met no one and no one can vouch for you, then I feel like that's a detriment to you. How do you?
But maybe work on finding that happy medium, because if you do that whole thing, it's who you know, it is who you know. But if you then can't prove that you know anything, then you're also not going to last very long there.
True. Yes. Actually do learn the stuff. I would say
find your happy medium place. Maybe don't stress on making an A at a 98 point level. Maybe a 92 is fine, and you actually get out of the house on a Tuesday night.
You're still saying get A's.
Why not? Aim high.
Yes, you can definitely get A's. If I could do school again, I would just get B's and go to things and do more stuff. I just work for a B. But I'm not sure I'm advising anyone to do that. I'm just saying also prioritize meeting people and getting out there, and especially doing internships. You used to post on the board all the time when anyone would email you or anything, any kind of organizations like that. And I thought that was great. But I feel like students don't always go out there or pay attention to it or have any kind of sense of urgency about getting internships. Right. Have you noticed that in any students? And if so, why do you think it is?
That's the number one thing that I would sort of push students to do. I don't want to stress anybody out, but I do think there's a vast chasm between sort of being stressed out and how did you phrase it? Not having a sense of urgency.
Yeah.
Like, up your urgency, down your stress, find, again, that sort of happy medium. But I think everybody sort of needs to know that the jobs aren't going to come looking for you. The people aren't going to beg you to work for them. You have to have an urgency about, I really want to get out here and I really want to do this. And there are, to your professional organizations question, there is a monetary sort of requirement that's involved in that too. And so somebody has to be willing to commit, except I think as a student, if I were to sort of go into it, I would say join NEWH on day one. As soon as you have a .edu address, your membership as a student is free. And so you can get access to all those different things. ASID and IIDA both have sort of different levels that they are working at with all of that, but why not take advantage of the ones that you know are free for students, and you can start, that can be sort of your baby steps. And when you feel comfortable with that, you can commit to joining one of the others. But there's so much to sort of go out there, and internships are important and urgency is important. But, to all of those things, we all are a little uncomfortable. Everybody is not the social butterfly that Sandy is.
I am not a social, but okay, go ahead.
I like to go to events.
Mhm.
About 45 minutes before an event, I really, really don't want to go to an event. But if I can push through that 45 minutes, I'm always happy to be at the event once I'm already there.
Mhm.
And I'm happy 2 weeks before the event. I'm looking forward to it. It's just that last little moment, like, do I want to give this time over? Pledge to give some of your time over, to other things, to networking, to joining things with like-minded people. Somebody asked me one day about volunteering, and if Habitat for Humanity is of great interest to you, then go out there and do it, because there are tons of other people, and it's also a way of meeting people that are in sort of a similar mindset to you. That's what these professional organizations are. That's what internships possibly are. Internships are as valuable for learning what you want to know as learning sort of what you don't want to know, what areas you're not interested in.
Oh my gosh, it is so important to know what you don't want to do. Yes,
Right.
yes.
So.
Okay. So yes, you guys find your medium. Don't listen to me. Don't just like settle on getting B's.
Well, you're the one with the fan base and the subscribers, right? So maybe they're going to listen to you.
Oh, maybe. I always tell people I'm just a stranger on the internet. You don't have to listen to anything. I'm just a stranger trying to cultivate information for all of us interested in design. Because I don't think that there's enough you know what? It's not that the information doesn't exist. I don't think it's easily accessible to people who have questions for, what is interior design really about, and what can I expect when I'm going to school, and all these kinds of things. I feel like all these answers are spread across the interwebs, and there's not like a central place for people to go to get their questions answered, if that makes sense.
The real answers just aren't as shiny and pretty as HGTV.
Yes, that's what it is. How do you feel about the design shows? When you see designers, and day one they're having the consult, day two is the install. How do you feel?
They are entertaining. Maybe there's a few nice products that are involved there.
Mm-hmm.
I hate the fact that you never see a tape measure in their hands. I think I shared with you before, I was very satisfied on one episode when a sofa wouldn't fit up a stairwell because they went shopping before they measured the space. And so they just loved this and knew it was going to fit. And then it didn't work in the stair to go up to the second floor area where they had planned it for. I'm like, success.
Reality.
So,
I remember being at an internship, and we had the same issue where the sofa didn't fit. She had ordered a sofa for she'd ordered sofas for the living room upstairs with the fireplace, and the family was taking their existing sofa and bringing it downstairs. So the designer that I was working for, she didn't actually order that piece of furniture. They ended up having to take the legs off the furniture and take off the door frame of the two doors that it was going to go down just to get it to the downstairs. And the whole thing was a nightmare. And she was like, oh, thank goodness I wasn't the one who ordered that sofa, because that would have been
right. Exactly.
And I got to learn that on the job and not my job, someone else's job. I was like, oh, great. Now I know to make sure that things can fit down stairwells and doorways.
You went to your car and have a good laugh.
Yes, I did. I still laugh about it till this day. Do you think that those shows help or hurt the design world?
They probably do, both in equal measure. I think that they don't portray reality. So, for instance, those budgets that they always show, they basically eliminate the cost of labor in there, because the person that's doing it, their labor costs are swept up into production. Mm-hmm. And so when I see a renovation that costs this, I'm like, but it didn't actually cost that. But it does foster a belief in the value of design. And it fosters a conversation about design and about making good design choices, and taking risks. I think until they see something on TV, no one ever pulls any of those like orange and purple paint samples, not together, but orange or purple paint samples from Home Depot, they're not looking at those. They're looking at soft blues and tans and
neutrals and grays and agreeable gray.
On occasional a yellow.
Oh,
but
cool.
never the really bold things. But when they see it on TV, they say, I really like that. So it's a great way to sort of expand people's horizons. It's sort of like travel. I encourage travel, but if you can't travel, then travel using your TV and look at things that are outside your comfort level and say, well, does that speak to me? I think it sort of does.
I agree with you. Definitely encourages the message of design. Design has a significant impact on, I believe, just our mental state and our quality of life. The fact that someone takes time to think about, colors, furnitures, that's not a word. Furnishings, that's a word. Or, say egress, sprinkler head, whatever. All those kinds of things are really important to the space that you live in. And even, who was it that said? I think someone said like good design is you don't even notice it, but you notice things that are bad, like when a doorway is too tight, or when something. Yeah, you notice when you're uncomfortable, but when you're comfortable, you're like, well, just going about your life.
Nice.
Yeah, and you have no idea all the 500 decisions that went into making it so nice. For the impracticality of those shows, and not including the budgets of the labor budgets and all those other things, because those are so funny to me. They're like, I'm a butterfly farmer and my budget's 1.5 million. I'm like, I need to get into the butterfly game. As impractical as those are, do you think any of those impractical beliefs or follow students into pursuing design as a career?
It probably doesn't follow them much further than beyond their first quarter or first semester, because, dispelling those things is usually fairly early on in the curriculum. And it's not to be a buzzkill, but it's to say, this is realistically what you're going to be doing. Well, and the fact that you're probably taking like a drafting course and sort of drawing straight lines. You're like, they never did this on TV. And you're like, oh, but you will. So I think it's partly a real discussion about the field, and it's partly you're starting to learn those first real skills. And when you do that, you can sort of take measure of, did I see this on TV? Did I not see this on TV? And, there are a lot of things that propel knowledge these days to what you're speaking of. There's TV shows, there's always magazines, there are blogs and other things, and every video, every platform imaginable. And so each person sort of got an agenda about what they want to do. I think it's just important that everybody be upfront about what theirs is for. Is it a dialogue? Is it a discussion? Is it sort of to dispel myths? Is it just to show pretty pictures? There's a lot of that. There's beautiful pictures in magazines of very impractical houses, or there's a beautiful room in a magazine that's not practical for me and my 2 dogs. So
yeah. I see that all the time. I don't think that people always pay attention to the practicality of a design, especially when it's stunning. Like when I go to show houses all the time, I remember that's one of the ways I actually started. I think you might have recommended that to me, to volunteer at a show house. And I started volunteering when I was in school. And that was such a lovely experience, getting to see all these different homes that were just immaculate, but also learning about designers that I didn't know about, because I was always, in school and had my head down. So I would like pick up their business cards, and maybe like you can email all of them and see if they're looking for an intern, just like things to just, say, hi, I'm so-and-so, I attend this university. Are you looking for an intern? Just the kind of stuff to put your foot out there. But the designs of the homes sometimes were, I was like, no one could live here. But obviously it's a show house, so I have to pay attention to where I'm consuming the content that I'm consuming it from, because it's not there to actually meant to be sit on or lived in or anything. They're always like, don't touch. We borrowed this and we have to give it back.
Do not crease this.
Nothing.
To what you were just saying, though, I will tell you one thing that a student fairly recently told me. I had introduced her to a designer. she reached out to them about potentially doing an internship with her. And they said, actually, we have a lot of jobs. They are all out of state right now. And so it's not a great time for us to be taking on an intern. But she followed that up with, when you are in town next, would it be okay for me to bring coffee and to have an informational interview with you? So that basically she could take half an hour and just pick the designer's brain of things that she was interested in or elements of what they did. And I thought, well, that's a really great way to not take no for an answer.
Yes, I respect
Because
your initiative.
yeah, it gets you in front of them. It maybe answers, two of your major questions about their style or the way that they work. And it probably makes you memorable to them, so that maybe later on when they do have a need for an intern, you're sort of on their mind.
Perfect. I could not have said that better myself. Absolutely. Do not take no for an answer. There are always ways to like go about, and those people don't even posting that they would consider
Right.
doing informational interviews. She just asked, and now she has answers to questions that she didn't before. Just yeah. So I think that's lovely. So you were saying that impracticality of those shows doesn't follow students past their first year, because once they start drafting and doing all the really technical stuff, construction documents, all of that, they're like, oh, okay, this is what it is.
Right.
For students that do make it past the impracticalities and into their final studios, into their senior year, and then are going out into the job market, what advice would you have for students who are about to graduate and are looking for positions?
Follow Sandy's advice. Go out to many, many things. You really do have to. You have to have started networking by then. It doesn't mean you have to go to every event, but you should have gone to a few events so you're not just a brand new face while you're job hunting at the same time. You have to have a point of view. Very few people who are graduating from college have exactly the sort of pinpoint in the field where they are going to exist for the rest of their professional careers. Mm-hmm. So, you can't go in and say, well, I'm not going to do this. I'm only going to do this. You've got to be hungry for it. You've got to go out there, and it is okay to know things that you just really, after a brief 8-month period in corporate design, know that I do not want to design offices. They are not for me. And that's fine, because there are a lot of other things that are. And when I was in that, I was putting my all into it, but I knew in my heart of hearts that it was not a love affair. And so when I go into this, I'm really looking for positives. I told somebody who was recently looking for a job or looking to change, I said, you can't run away from something, you have to run towards something. And so you really have to look at what it is that you want and where that exists and how you can sort of amplify your voice towards that. So do network, do keep your grades up, do talk to your friends, and be very vocal. All of your classmates you're in competition with, but they're also your greatest allies. They're your greatest allies while you're trying to solve that problem in your studio class. They're also your greatest allies outside of this, because if you had a great working relationship and they have a spot in their firm, they're going to want to bring you in because they know they can work with you. And if they know that you were a pain on every group project that you ever had, they're going to be like, oh my God, never hire this person, please. And it's true, because that impacts them.
Yeah.
Personally. And so those, you've got to sort of nurture the relationships, both the ones you have and the ones you want.
So make sure you network and nurture the relationships that are around you.
Right.
For applying to positions at firms versus obviously trying to go off and start your own business right out of school, is there anything to keep in mind when applying for positions at firm or accepting positions at firms? And what I say for this is, I have a friend who works at a firm in town, and she is not permitted to promote any of her work that she works on outside of the firm. And then I know when she leaves, the things that she has worked on, she cannot showcase in her portfolio. And so I guess like there are these things to think about that I wasn't really aware of until she told me. So have you ever run into anything like that? Any firms that you ever worked at, or are those things that students should keep in mind? Are they not common for something like that?
I've not run into that. I I was never able to share anything that was proprietary. So if there was a specific design that we had done for this client that was not able to be shared, then the client would vocalize that.
Mhm.
In my portfolio, if I did work at a particular firm, I would acknowledge that firm in my portfolio and say, because in a job interview, it's a conversation. And so they would be looking through the book and they would say, oh, you did this while you were at such and such. And say, yes, I was on a project team. There were 6 of us. My main responsibility in what you're looking at was for this, and the custom design of this, and the FF&E pieces for this over here. So I could be very specific. The people who were sort of hemming and hawing about, oh yeah, it was a team effort and such, those are the people that the interviewer probably questions a bit more because they don't have sort of a firm thing that they could point to that was their responsibility. But usually, unless it's something very specifically proprietary, you're allowed to show work that you worked on as part of the collective, acknowledging what your specific roles were in that total work.
Okay, it's good to hear a differing opinion. I thought you just couldn't share anything from any firm that you'd worked at, because it would be considered their design, even if you were responsible for a portion of it. But good to know that is not true everywhere.
You would not be able to, let's just say you had the CAD file or the Revit file for this hotel that you had worked on.
Oh yeah, don't show that.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to go to another place or go out on your own and say, hey, I've got this hotel we can build together.
No, don't do that.
Yeah, but just photos are just photos.
Would you say when employers are looking at bringing on junior designers that they are, or more green designers, that they're more interested in what someone was able to complete, like a before and after, or more like the process, like your blocking diagram and your bubbles and your criteria made? Like, are they more interested in seeing that kind of stuff, or is all of it weighed equally the same?
It's different depending on what their needs are. And so if it is a firm, I worked at a firm where there were 3 principals. And the principals did the majority of sort of the initial mock-ups and the planning, and then sort of passed it on to a senior person to sort of verify that those met all the needs. And then that senior person then collected a team together. So at that firm, the younger people did very, very little of the actual planning. They did a lot of the production of the documents that were in there. But I've also been at a small firm where I would go out, take the as-built measurements, input that into the computer, be asked about maybe my initial space planning ideas since I've been in the structure before, where I thought was the best place to strategize. And then as a sort of group, maybe around a meeting, we would sort of sketch out, maybe around a table, we would sketch out maybe sort of how we saw the allocation of parts going through. I think because of the versatility in the field, you sort of got to be able to sketch one day and work in CAD or Revit one day and go to ADAC one day and go over here, because that may be a week, where you get pushed and pulled on different projects to meet those deadlines. There are also times where you'll go 3 months and you will only look at CAD or Revit on your screen 5 or 6 days a week, every day for those 3 months, because you've got a very specific drawing package to get out, and you won't touch a fabric, or you won't step foot outside the office. It's the needs of the business on any given day.
For anyone who feels potentially like put off by you saying you won't touch a fabric and you'll only look at CAD for 5 or 6 days a week, I would say to that person is that each process is valuable. And even for things that you don't necessarily like doing, there's something to be learned from that. And exposure to all aspects of a job is never a bad thing.
Well, And I will, maybe that sounded more harsh than it was. Remembering that I went into my first job with an architecture degree and was working on interior design things, I was doing a significant amount of drawing. And when I couldn't stand to look at that computer screen anymore, I would walk back into the library. I didn't have anything in particular I was looking for for a job. I just needed to spend 5 minutes away from my computer, stretching and standing up, looking at things. And if I found something that I liked, I'd be like, oh, I'm going to take this back to my desk and pin it up. And maybe for the next project, this will be a great thing for me to have or know about or use. So I'm sort of developing that. And, by the next day, if I was tired of it, then I would put it back. And if I wasn't, then I would keep it pinned up. And so eventually, pretty things were all around me.
Yeah. You seem to have a knack for pretty things. I wouldn't say that there aren't always pretty things around you. You're very talented. Well, thank you so much for answering all of my questions. Now it's time to get to your questions. I'm going to pull up the DMs that everyone sent and the questions that they have that my subscribers have for you.
Okay.
I think we might have answered this, but we are asked here, so what is a common mistake you see newcomers make? I would say those who are new to interior design. I would think that they're talking about professional designers who are getting started. So what is a common mistake you'll see?
Not asking questions, feeling like, well, they won't keep me if they think that I have questions. They're always, and I learned this in my first 6 months on the job. I was out on a site with one of the principals of the firm, and he pointed out something that was wrong. I'm like, oh, that's actually how we documented this. He was like, we never do this, and he sort of explained to me on the site, we did this way, we did this way, and he went off and he had a talk with the general contractor, and he did it. But it wasn't, but somebody else was sort of giving information, and I was sort of trying to document it as much as possible, but I was out on the site visit, and so I knew what the document said. But I think, it would have been an opportunity. I was glad that he gave an explanation, but I also, if he hadn't given one, if he just said, this is wrong, I would definitely want to sort of follow up and say, well, why? Explain to me what this should have been so that I'll know next time to do it. Or just in the fact that they may have had a conversation with the client that you weren't privy to or you weren't around, and so they're sort of saying something and you're like, wait a minute, that goes against everything we've sort of planned for. I need to know when this shift happened so I can trace back any changes that I've made since up until that time. Ask questions.
Definitely. Ask questions, guys. You need to know.
We're on the same team.
How much of your creativity is limited by client requirements?
I wish that I had written it down at the time, but probably like 15 years ago, there was a very famous architect, and they said that their best projects in their entire lifetime were the ones that had the most restrictions, because it challenged them to be a better designer and to design around that. And it's true. It's not that you need 47,000 different ways to sort of bring the window of opportunity in on this, but if you have everything open to you with sort of no restrictions, then that unlimitedness can almost become a burden to that creativity, because everything's possible. Everything's on the plate of possibilities. And so if you just have a few key things to start to react to, I think it helps you to make better, more strategic decisions, because essentially we're not making a pretty palette that we look at on this board. We're making something that we intend to install or construct and to exist in someone's life. And so that's where it has to be successful, not necessarily how it presents on a board or on a screen. And so that's the thing that I would sort of push, is the rounding all of that out and looking at all those things together.
Great answer. I agree. Let's see. How to build a market for being an architect. Okay. So if you are a freelance architect or trying to start your own firm, I believe that what they're actually asking is how to attract clients as an architect.
It depends on what you want to do. If you want to do commercial work, you need to go work for a commercial firm and get those kinds of projects under your belt, or at least work with a commercial contractor that can do that. Residential work, it comes by a variety of ways. People seek people out who have written books or published their works. And, you know, there are residential designers and architects who are almost ubiquitous on the internet. Their stuff is always out there somewhere in magazines. And so people seek them out. I know one guy that he wanted to work in a very specific historic neighborhood. And so he made a small postcard that had sort of his greatest hits on it. And he printed enough of those to put that postcard into the mailbox of every person in that historic neighborhood that he wanted to work at. Just sort of putting, you know, planting the seed for what if you wanted to do a renovation. And then because there are people that want to do updates all the time, word of mouth is huge with residential work, and even similar clients. A terrible story, but a very true story. We were working on a very large house that it was historic. Over time, it had been broken up into 5 apartments. So you can imagine sort of the size of the immensity of this house.
Yeah.
This couple bought it. They were a young couple. They had 1 child. They bought it. They wanted to restore it back to a single family dwelling. So it was 3 stories and a basement. Got it back. It was beautiful. 2 years later, they divorced. She bought another house, wanted to renovate it with us. He bought a penthouse condo, wanted to renovate it with us. They recommended us to the new owners of the house who wanted to build a garage/pool house and pool in the back. And so, you know, that was 4 jobs out of that family because they enjoyed working with us and because we listened, and they, you know, we all worked through the same contractors and everything. So it was almost like one big long project, but it wasn't. And so that's sort of internal word of mouth, I guess. And so all those are best way. Residentially, word of mouth is the best thing to go because you've already got somebody that's happy and willing to talk about you. The cold calls, the cold mailings may or may not work, but they may at least put a idea in someone's head that they can get started with maybe a small kitchen renovation.
Yeah. I really respect the story about the gentleman who wanted to work in the historic neighborhood and put little flyers, because that kind of grassroots, like hitting the pavement, like you gotta just put the pedal to the metal and you gotta figure out a way to make something go. There's a designer that I work with now, and one of her things that she's done is she has a friend who's a realtor, and her friend's a broker and has realtors under her. And she's offering like a free 30-minute consultation, because realtors are always looking for a gift to give a closing gift to give their clients. So in addition to whatever, you know, they're doing, and this is someone who literally just bought a house, definitely needs to help, you know, redoing it. They're in the good mind frame. They probably already love their experience with their realtor if they bought a house from them. And now it's like some rapport first, and she doesn't technically know the realtor, she just knows the broker. And I thought it was a cool example of getting, you know, attracting clients without necessarily cold calling every single one.
Definitely.
All right, next question. What is the hardest case of your design about architect or interior for your client? What are they saying here? What are you trying to say, person? What is the hardest case?
Hardest case?
Yes.
Like the hardest project?
I think so. I think that's what they're asking. I think they're asking, what is a really difficult project you worked on?
A difficult project is one where the client doesn't know themselves or isn't able to describe to you. So the majority of my work professionally has come in the form of hotels or houses. And so I'll use a house. Residential clients are generally a little bit more difficult because when a hotel is being built, it's usually by a professional group who's built many hotels. And so they sort of know the business, they know how to make decisions, they know sort of what they're basing it on. And so it's a business practice for them. With a residential client, they may do this once in their lifetime, they may do it twice in their lifetime, they rarely do it more than that. And so it's always sort of a learning opportunity. Mm-hmm. I had a client who, when it came time, so we had sort of planned everything from the interior architecture side of things, mm-hmm. but we really hadn't broken ground sort of on what we wanted to do in terms of the finishes. A lot of times a residential client will come and say, this is my scrapbook of all these pictures that I want to recreate in my house. And I'm like, this is great. It gives me a sense of your taste. I can deal with this, even if it's 400 pages. This client was the opposite of that. She had nothing. And so, you know, we needed something to get started from. She said, well, I mean, this is me. And basically she was wearing a pale blue Oxford that day and some khaki pants and, you know, nothing elaborate, nothing. So we're like, okay, she likes blue, soft colors, classic lines. You know, that's all what I'm looking at is what I've got to go with.
Mm-hmm.
So we met 2 weeks later to do an initial sort of finish presentation, get a reaction, you know, planning that there would be some revisions. She walked in, we started sort of walking through. She said, well, I really need to say, I don't really like the color blue. And, you know, so to her initial description, she was not talking, she wasn't, I don't even think she was aware of what color she was wearing. I think she was saying that this is me, I'm simple, I'm practical, I'm functional,
Mm-hmm.
which still doesn't help me a lot with style or colors. But before she left, we put some colors in front of her just to gauge reaction, different, you know, dualities of paints, finishes, to see where she had some reactions. Like, just point to 3 things that you like in this.
Mm-hmm.
And then scheduled another presentation for 2 weeks later so that we would have a chance to sort of pull that again. But if a client doesn't communicate what their needs are or what their expectations are clearly, or if they don't do it well, or if they're not self-aware, then it makes our job harder, because to the earlier question about, you know, how much do limitations hurt or help, she gave us no limitations. And so, but she also didn't give us any sort of positive things to aim at either.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really just us pulling from our own minds, which doesn't work.
See that being difficult.
Particularly for a house which is so personal to someone.
Absolutely. I hear that, who was it that said this? It was one of the professors at the other institute who said that when you're someone's residential designer, you're their therapist. And you're their like cousin, their best friend, they're this, they're that. And that's it. There's a lot of emotion with residential design that isn't necessarily there with commercial, because it's more of a job with commercial, but it's someone's home, you know, that it's incredibly personal to them. And they want to convey that to you, sometimes annoyingly amount. Sometimes in a way that could be very questioning and make it seem like you maybe don't know like what you're doing. Not that you don't know what you're doing, but I think designers, no artist would want to be questioned about their art, of course. But I believe that obviously, I think most designers are probably really good at learning that management of expectation with your client and trying to help set those boundaries. You don't want them FaceTiming you at 4 a.m. about a paint color. I had to change my mind. I know we just had the whole thing painted yesterday, but I'm really feeling like agreeable grays, and for me,
the paints look very different at 4 a.m.
Yes.
And on the other side, I also had a client, and she was amazing, and she was afraid to choose a paint color on her own. And so what she shared, so she was very happy, very happy, very happy. We did multiple jobs. We got to one thing in her kitchen, and she said, Michael, I can tell you now after the fact, but you pulled out that paint color for the kitchen, and I really had my questions. I just wasn't sure about that. She said, but it's up now, and it's amazing, and it couldn't have picked anything better, and I trust. And you know, so it's really building on this trust over the span of a lot of small projects. And I loved, not that she never questioned, but that she was so excited and happy with the choices that were made on her behalf, that she was like, I feel really great in your hands.
That's good. That's how you want people to feel. All right, next question. If your goal is to do residential and light commercial, should you go for a bachelor's degree?
A bachelor's degree?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's going to drive your, versus just sort of starting out on your own at 18, or?
I believe that's what they mean. Instead of just starting on your own, should you go and pursue a bachelor's degree?
Yes. I feel like life is better with more knowledge rather than less knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that you don't know things. You might know, like, you may be the son or daughter of a professional builder. And so you may have this sort of in your brain. Your parent may be an architect, your parent may be a designer, your parent may be an engineer. So you may have been working on this your whole life. I feel like a bachelor's degree doesn't teach you in the same way that a parent would, or sort of a setting around you would. It gives you a chance to bounce new contemporary ideas off of classmates who are sort of struggling with the same thing. I feel like it sets you up to figure out what the process is for you, because I don't know about everybody else, but I don't feel like my process is necessarily the same as my father or my mother or my aunt or my uncle or whoever.
I got it.
So I think it's an aid to knowing yourself. Now, do I think that you need to go for 5 years and spend $100,000 and whatever like that? I wouldn't suggest it. But I feel like you need to go to the right place for you. If you are really looking for a like push you to your limits place, or if you're looking for sort of a small place with small classes and sort of nurturing group, or you're looking for a general like state college or something like that where you can go and get the full sort of college experience. Everybody's got a different thing, and there is no right answer to any of those. It just dawned on me that maybe this person was talking about the difference between doing like an associate's degree at a technical college and then going on to versus going on to a bachelor's. And I will say this, build on your technical college degree. Work
as in terms of like more schooling or real world experience?
Like both. Go work, see how far you can grow in that, but also go to a university. If you decide to go further, go to a university that has an articulation agreement with your technical college, because those articulation agreements are in place to guarantee what credits that you took transfer and will count already. And so you will already know and have guaranteed what will count and what won't count. And so you'll have a better plan for what your steps are going forward. A lot of the technical colleges will take you up to the point of an initial residential class, or maybe a space planning class that focuses on the residential side, but they won't take you into in-depth studios like an in-depth kitchen and bath, or excuse me, an in-depth kitchen and bath, an in-depth commercial or hospitality or educational or healthcare project. And so I know the person said, residential or light commercial, but if you, light commercial is really a loose term. If you are sort of going into any of the veins of commercial design, having a more technical studio is going to build a better portfolio for you. But if you get an associate's degree, you go and you're working for a firm and sort of building your professional network, and you are being promoted based on the work that you're producing, you're learning, you're sort of growing within their system. I don't feel like there's necessarily a need if you're happy there, but you have to be very comfortable and confident, because that lack or that limitation may be something that sort of stunts you in the eyes of another firm, and you just don't have any way of knowing.
Okay. All right, robust answer. I appreciate it.
Like the longest answer of the day.
That probably was, but I think you also answered her next question, because it's the same person. She says, is it difficult to find interior design jobs with only an associate's degree? But you're saying to build on your associate's degree with either real world experience or additional education. Can you, if you choose not to build on it with additional education, do you think that that's ever held anybody back? Like, oh, you can't work here, you only have an associate's degree, even if they have the knowledge?
If it does, it's because the person, the place is not willing to take the chance. They sort of know sort of where they want to go. Mm-hmm. I would say if that person maybe knew somebody else that was there that, really sort of vouched for them to the owners and said, not that that's even necessary, but, if they had questions and there was a person that was there that they trusted the knowledge of, and they said, this person has as much knowledge as I do, that would be a way in the door. And there are going to be some places that won't care. It's just that maybe you will have the skills for a job that's posted, and maybe you won't. You know, all of us are not an ideal fit for every job.
Nope.
No matter how much we want to go work for a specific place. Maybe the job that we want there that they have posted right now is not the job for us, but maybe the one in 2 years is.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. That's the end of my DMs, and you've answered my questions, you've answered their questions, and I really enjoyed having you.
Answered all of these questions, went out on some tangents a few times, but either way.
Thank you everyone for watching. I hope you learned some good nuggets. I know I sure did. And if you want to see more interviews like this, please give us a thumbs up. Let me know. Hit that subscribe button. Because like I always say, if you like it, Beyonce said if you like it, put a ring on it. I say if you like it, subscribe. If you like it, then you've got to subscribe to it. And this is my little dance first.